So as you all know, the so-called liberal cable news network in this country is MSNBC. You have Fox News, which is the Republican propaganda network and the Donald Trump propaganda network. You have One America News and Newsmax, which are to the right of Fox, even bigger, hardcore MAGA. But then you have CNN, which is supposed to be like the centrist network. And you have MSNBC, which is supposed to be the more liberal network, supposed to be, more in line with the establishment Democratic Party. They're not actually on the left. They're just liberal on social issues and defenders of the Democrats in every way, shape, and form. Okay. Well, as you're about to see here, the entire debate and discussion in this country on the issue of Israel and Gaza is beyond warped. It is beyond grotesque. It is completely and utterly disconnected from the reality on the ground and even the opinions of normie Americans. So on Morning Joe, which is one of the most right-leaning shows on MSNBC, and by the way, they're on air for like a gazillion hours every single morning. Just putting that out there, right? One of the regular hosts here, Donnie Deutsch, is talking about the so-called rescue operation that happened the other day. Remember this? We discussed this. How Israel went in and they got 4 hostages that were being held by Hamas, but at the same time managed to allegedly kill 3 hostages, including an American citizen, and also killed 274 Palestinians and injured 698. So they bombed a path, bombed their way in, killed all these civilians, bombed their way out, and they got 4 of the hostages. And then everybody in Western media, all the gaggle of idiots, the lemmings, were clapping like, amazing, heroic rescue mission, amazing, heroic. The point Omar Badr made sticks with me. He says, just flip the scenario for a second. Imagine Hamas busts into Israel, whatever their special forces wing is, assuming they even have them, right? They bust into Israel. They free 4 Palestinian hostages being held by Israel. By the way, Israel's holding literally thousands. And in the process, they kill 274 Israeli civilians and injure 698. Would anybody in any conceivable world look at that and say, oh, what an amazing victory? What? No, that would be just discussed as like another October 7th, a historic atrocity brought about by an evil group. But you flip the scenario, and look, you could see the embedded assumptions. The embedded assumptions are, we are the good guys, they are the bad guys. Full stop. Don't allow in any nuance, any complexity, any facts that we don't like. That's it. They live in a world where it's like a fucking dumb comic book superhero movie. We're pure good, they're pure evil. So if we save 4 but kill 274, that's called a victory, my friend. This is what dehumanization is. This is exactly what it is. Those 274 don't count. They just don't count. Okay, so anyway, back to MSNBC. So Donnie Deutsch goes on Morning Joe, and I can't stress this enough. He tweeted this himself as if he's spitting hot fire. He tweeted that this is his own Twitter account. And he posted this as if this is a brilliant point that I want you to hear. Keep that in mind as we listen. Here's what he says, talking about the hostage situation and the media's reaction. Here we go.
We have to start to really talk honestly about the definition of civilian casualties. 4 hostages rescued and 270 Palestinian civilians killed. We need to start to look at that word civilians. When the hostages were being held by a Palestinian journalist, a civilian, and a Palestinian doctor, a civilian, these are not civilians. These are Hamas ambassadors. And yes, there are innocent civilians, but I think back to also the hundreds and thousands of rabid Gazans as they drag their corpse through Gaza, cheering, hysterical with glee and joy. And it's just, once again, the media coverage is, and these were 4 hostages that were taken on a day that 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered, maimed, decapitated, killed in the most gruesome way. And I don't know if Americans had 4 hostages that were taken and we had a rescue mission. And yes, there were 270 casualties, and many of those Palestinian casualties are deep sympathizers of Hamas. Would the coverage be the same way? Would anybody be criticizing the rescue mission, or would it be truly one of heroism? But I do think we have to start to really talk honestly about the definition of civilian casualties.
Let me sum that up for you in layman's terms. They're not really civilians. That's what he's saying. Those 274 Palestinians who were killed in this, by the way, dozens of them, dozens, were children. They're not really civilians. Can we be honest here? They don't really count. This is the point he's making. All right, well, Donnie Deutsch, let me put this simply. You sound like a Nazi. The point Crystal made, and I think she's going to do a monologue on this, guys, definitely check this out, is this is literally the logic of Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden said, hey, the U.S. government does all these fucked up things and occupies Muslim lands and bombs Muslims and starves Muslims. And I'm not just against the government. I'm not just against the people actually doing the war crimes and the evil deeds. I'm against all Americans. Why? Because you're just as guilty as your government, because your government is supposed to represent you. And if they're doing fucked up things, if you don't try to overthrow them, you're also the bad guy. So now I'm going to fly some planes into the Twin Towers. He's using the logic of Nazis. He's using the logic of bin Laden. By the way, a great point that Mac made, good politic guy. He said, by this logic, literally any Iraqi would be able to come to this country and kill whoever they want. Why? Because during the Iraq War, I don't know if you guys know this, at the beginning portion, Bush had like a 90% approval rating. People supported us going into Iraq. And what happened? We killed hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, displaced millions. We did torture. We ruined an entire country, which led to the rise of ISIS. We destroyed countless lives. Now, would Donnie Deutsch accept that if some Iraqi person who had their life ruined comes here and starts doing mass shootings of U.S. civilians and says, look, you're not really civilians. This person voted for George Bush and they supported the Iraq War. Is that really a civilian? That doesn't count as a civilian to me. Would Donnie Deutsch look at that and say, oh yeah, that makes sense? This is the logic he's using. He's so fucking stupid, he's incapable of putting the shoe on the other foot. He's incapable of thinking of this in terms of an objective standard, a universalist approach. By the way, I haven't even made the most devastating point yet. What's the most devastating point? All right, Donnie, you ready for this? You sitting down? There was a poll that came out, and it was about a month or two into Israel just totally destroying Gaza, trying to wipe it off the map, killing all these civilians. You know what that poll showed? 94% of Israelis, 94%, said either the IDF is using the right amount of force in Gaza or they're not using enough. Only 4% said, hey, this goes too far. You're killing too many innocents. And again, this is at a time when the death rate of innocent civilians was about 90%. By your own logic, you fucking meathead, by your own logic, it would be totally justified and totally acceptable for Hamas to murder Israeli civilians because, hey, man, they're not really civilians. They don't really count because they believe things that are bad. They believe things that are bad. Well, I got news for you. That's not a death sentence in a world that makes sense, in a world that is civilized and rational and has laws. It's not a death sentence if you have bad beliefs. Actions are what count. Actions. And he's saying, hey, man, even those dozens of children who were murked by Israel in this raid, guilty enough. Guilty enough. Innocent civilians. A butcher over here, somebody who runs a bakery over here, has a restaurant over here, an aid worker over there. Guilty enough. Guilty enough. This is literally terrorists' logic. He sounds like a Nazi. He sounds like bin Laden. What are you supposed to do in a situation like this? How are you supposed to get it through to somebody this fucking dense that what they're saying is so far beyond the pale, it's inconceivable? Again, we're at the point now, guys, I never in my lifetime thought I would see a resurgence of just flat out genocidal hysteria and mania. But that's exactly what we're witnessing now. They have dehumanized Palestinians so fully that on the liberal network in the U.S., this guy's saying the civilians aren't really civilians. They don't count. Could you imagine if I told you a year ago that we would get this much cheerleading for outright genocide? Would you have believed me? That it would get this bad. That it would get this bad. That literally the State of Israel Twitter account would tweet something like this. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. Many Gazan civilians participated in the horrific events of October 7th. And they go on to say, quote, there are no innocent civilians there. If I had told you stuff like that would casually be said. Would you have believed me? I wouldn't have believed myself. I wouldn't have. Because naively, I thought, look, there are some things, society has evolved at least to the point where there's some things where everybody draws a red line. That, ladies and gentlemen, is fucking dead wrong. There are no red lines. There are plenty of people who will defend. There's people who floated nuking Gaza, and it's more than one. I think we've covered at least 3 or 4 different people who've like, yeah, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, nuke them. Yeah, why not? So how many out there actually believe this? And how many, here's an even better question, how many are willing to just casually and passively accept the violence, the brutality, the genocidal actions, where it's just rationalized and justified over time, like, it's a mess. What are you going to do? The area is what it is. Imagine for a second somebody's flip the roles here. And somebody said this about Israelis on MSNBC or on anywhere in mainstream media in the US. The Israeli civilians, are they really civilians? Do they really count as civilians? If somebody said that in US media, they would be fired before the end of the day. But you say it about Palestinians, it's a fucking yawn. They won't even release a statement. Never mind fire his punk ass. Because the dehumanization is baked into the cake of our media and our political establishment. I've never seen more brazen double standards in my life. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.